Sometimes a hyped Star Wars game will release in a state that is nearly broken for most people. Other times, a remake of arguably one of the best sci-fi RPGs of all time gets announced and then the whole project just falls off a cliff for multiple years. Thankfully, I've followed this game's descent into development hell in great detail. So grab your lightsabers and get ready to channel the Force because we're about to find out exactly what's going on with the Knights of the Old Republic remake. Before we start, why don't you consider giving this video a like and let us know in the comments if you think it'll actually come out. It's free and it genuinely helps our channel grow. Like most cases of a missing game, our story begins with an announcement trailer. September 9th, 2021. Sony airs one of their signature PlayStation showcases. The show opens and we're greeted by a Lucasfilm Games production logo. That confirmation is mostly delivered when a voice that sounds suspiciously like Jennifer Hale narrates a dark scene talking about the Sith. A red lightsaber is ignited by a shadowy figure, then lifted to reveal the unmistakable mask of Darth Revan, one of the coolest characters in Star Wars lore and a central character of KOTOR. Sony showed 17 other games in that presentation, almost all of which have already been released, but the KOTOR teaser was the definitive winner of that night. In another universe, we would all probably have a shiny new KOTOR game on our PlayStation 5s, if we had them. But in this universe, the game is still nowhere to be found, and people with connections to its development seem to think it's in deep trouble. Even industry insider Jeff Grubb said on a podcast, "I don't think KOTOR remake will ever come out." The KOTOR teaser also revealed who is burdened with the massive responsibility of doing this game justice. The development studio, Aspyr Media. Aspyr is probably not instantly recognizable to most, but they seem to be a solid choice for the project at first glance. They made a name for themselves in the late 90s by porting popular window games like Tomb Raider and Deus Ex to macOS. More recently, they were responsible for the slew of classic Star Wars game ports that hit the Nintendo Switch over the past few years, including the original KOTOR. So far, so good. They're already intimately familiar with the game, now all they have to do is build it again, from the ground up, on a brand new piece of hardware. No big deal. This wouldn't normally be a problem, but when you look into Aspyr's list of works and see that they only have a single game that they developed in-house, the VR game Torn, things begin to get a little shaky. Aspyr likely knew that people would notice that a port-centric studio building an important game from the ground up might be cause for concern. So, lead producer at Aspyr Media, Ryan Treadwell, delivered an informative post to the PlayStation blog that coincided with the game's announcement. In it, he acknowledged the impact and importance of the original game and outlined the steps that they are taking to make sure the remake is a slam dunk, including reiterating their close relationship with Lucas Games and letting us know that they brought on some of the best talent from across the industry to work on the project, some of which even worked on the original game back at BioWare. These are obviously all good things that fans want to hear, and for a little while it seemed like things were going well. But even at that point, all was not right. For more context about the situation, let's go back a few years. 2018. According to various reports and rumors, a bevy of dev studios were courting Lucasfilm Games for a chance to work on a KOTOR project. Allegedly, studios including Obsidian Entertainment, the creators of Fallout New Vegas and KOTOR 2, pitched their concept and were in the running. However, it was the smaller, Austin, Texas-based porting studio Aspyr Media that blew Lucasfilm Games away, and they began the process of entering a partnership towards the end of that year. According to a July 2022 report by games journalist Jason Schreier, Aspyr's KOTOR remake project entered pre-production in 2019, and we all know what happened in 2020. So it's not far-fetched to speculate that the pre-production of even early development of the KOTOR remake was affected by the industry-wide adjustments that had to be taken in the face of the pandemic. February of 2021. In the midst of the KOTOR remake's development, Aspyr Media is purchased by Embracer Group and brought on as a subsidiary under the Saber Interactive banner. If you haven't seen the headlines, the Embracer Group is a Swedish holding company that has been on a bit of a buying spree in recent years. Just look how long this page goes, and the fact that I can keep going while I'm still talking about that just proves quite how long this list is. And oh, it's still going. Okay. I can't say much more on that. Just this is a bit concerning. I'm hoping by now the list has gone past. Embracer reportedly coughed up $100 million for their Spire. With the potential bonuses on the table, that number balloons to a total of $450 million. And they also purchased Borderlands creator Gearbox Software that very same month for a staggering $1.3 billion, along with assorted other acquisitions. So it goes without saying that Embracer had money to burn, and the additional cash injection they gave to the KOTOR remake could only be a good thing. After all, a game as big and important as Knights of the Old Republic deserves the best team and the biggest budget possible in order to do justice to the 2-decade-old masterpiece, especially in this heyday of Star Wars media. In fact, things were so good at Aspyr at the beginning of 2021 that they allegedly even had a small team split off from the KOTOR remake to begin the pre-production stages of the full-on KOTOR 2 remake that would follow the current project. Confidence was high, and there were even rumors that Aspyr might be completing the trilogy with their own KOTOR 3 at some point. Unfortunately for Aspyr, one pitfall came in the form of a partnership that was supposed to firmly lock the game's success into place. At some point in 2021, Aspyr allegedly approached Microsoft about partnering on the KOTOR remake and giving the game Xbox exclusivity in some capacity, just as the original game had. Unfortunately, it appears Microsoft isn't interested in collaborating with dev studios they don't own and aren't in the process of acquiring, so they passed on it. They already have a direct partnership with Lucasfilm Games anyways, and the Indiana Jones game that's currently in production at the Wolfenstein studio Machine Games. The logical step to follow after being turned down by Microsoft was to head on over to their rival Sony, who were on board almost immediately. Now, the exact details of Sony's partnership are unknown, but even employees within Aspyr who are in the know agreed on one thing: Sony holds a lot of power in this partnership. This is strange since the game is only going to be a timed exclusive rather than a full exclusive like the original KOTOR was. At any rate, the Sony deal is completed, and the PlayStation Showcase announcement follows. A legend remade for PS5, it says in bold letters. Presumably before much was seen by anybody outside of Aspyr in terms of the work that had been done, a megaton of expectations were being placed on this game. With just a short, pre-rendered teaser, the KOTOR remake was being positioned as a must-play game that was being built exclusively for PlayStation and would adhere to the high standards that its fans and Sony expect of any game they put their name on. For example, 2021 saw the release of Returnal and Ratchet & Clank Drift Apart, two incredible games custom built for the PS5 to leverage its many features. This is the kind of game Sony probably had in mind when they signed on, but that's the issue with high expectations. They can let you down hard. While families gathered and celebrated the holidays, Aspyr's KOTOR remake project was officially entering full production. Morale was high, the money was flowing, and the team at Aspyr was generally optimistic. Sources inside the company said that the game was targeting a July 2023 release date at this point, which would coincide with the 20th anniversary of KOTOR's original release. Conveniently, that date also fell just past the end of EA's Star Wars licensing deal, which I'm sure was entirely a coincidence. Other, more level-headed employees made note of the scale and depth of what the project entailed, and estimated its release to be closer to the end of 2024 or 2025. May of 2022. Embracer Group releases their Q4 report, and a board member named Matthew Karch makes the announcement that Saber Interactive, Aspyr's parent company after the acquisition, will now be joining the KOTOR remake's development. The announcement causes ears to perk up, but the ensuing statements make sense. It's a massive product, and massive products require a lot of effort and a lot of time to make good. And especially when you're talking about a game already old. very old. We've basically had to remake that game from scratch. Karch also added that we would hear more about the game in the coming months. Even before Saber joined to help, development on the KOTOR project, known internally as Project Romeo, was proceeding rather smoothly. For roughly 6 months, resources were largely being focused on a vertical slice demo that they could show both Lucasfilm Games and Sony. In June of 2022, the vertical slice demo was completed and presented to Aspire's partners. Lucasfilm Games, who has a deep partnership with Aspire, by the way, dating back to 2002 when they began porting Star Wars games over, was delighted. They more or less knew what the game Aspire was working on would eventually become, and whatever they showed in the vertical slice confirmed their thoughts. There was no negativity coming from Lucasfilm. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of Sony. Allegedly, Sony was extremely unhappy with various aspects of the game. If you've been paying even a little bit of attention to PlayStation since the release of the PlayStation 3, you'll know that they have kind of positioned themselves as the publisher of breathtakingly lavish, incredibly cinematic single-player action-adventure games with the kind of production value most games wouldn't dream of achieving. They are the people that brought us The Last of Us, Uncharted, Death Stranding, God of War, and the Horizon games, after all. Nobody outside of Aspire, Lucasfilm, and Sony knows what was shown in that demo. But it couldn't have been anything like what Sony had published in the past. Sony's reaction to what had been put together came as a shock to those working on the game at Aspire, as they were all generally very happy with what they had done so far. Don't forget, Aspire put time and effort into rounding up top talent, and resources close to the project even said that the KOTOR remake team was the best one they had ever worked with. Not wanting to displease a major partner on the project, Aspire did an extreme course correction to appease Sony, and this is where it all started to fall apart. July 2022. Aspire fires 2 important members of the KOTOR remake project, the art director Jason Miner and the design director Brad Prince. You know, just 2 of the most important roles when it comes to cementing the overall look and feel of a game, and the ones who partially determine how cinematic a game turns out. No big deal. Unconfirmed reports state that even at the time of those firings, Aspire leadership admitted that they regretted making those decisions, but they were frantically trying to find a way to steer the game's development to make all partners happy. Or maybe just Sony, because it sounded like the other... You know what, never mind. An unnamed Aspire employee leaked the details of the vertical slice demo and the ensuing chaos of Jason Schreier, who then created a report for Bloomberg outlining the situation. The fallout to this report understandably put even more stress on not just Aspire, but everybody involved with the project. Schreier's report stated that production was paused shortly after the demo, but there are conflicting reports that work continued for at least 2 months.
August 2022.
Along with the announcement of a handful of new acquisitions, Embracer Group makes a mention of a big project. One of the group's AAA projects has transitioned to another studio within the group to ensure the quality bar is where we need it to be for that title. We are not expecting any material delays for the title based on this transition. KOTOR is never mentioned by name, but looking at Embracer's slates and considering the news that broke a few weeks before, it's pretty easy to put 2 and 2 together. Inside sources have since confirmed that the project has, in fact, been taken away from Aspire and is squarely on the shoulders of Saber Interactive. It's worth noting that through all this, Aspire had been completely silent, not just outwardly to fans hanging on their every word, but to their own employees. Discontent within Aspire grew, and between September and October, 70 members of the 200-person team left to work on other projects, which is made clear by the LinkedIn profiles of the employees who left. That was really the last news of any kind of importance that we heard regarding the KOTOR remake for 7 months. May of 2023. The Embracer Group had an earnings presentation for its investors, and CEO Lars Wingfer looked like someone spilled his blue milk. The company was riding high on some new acquisitions and a solid turnout for the cursed game Dead Island 2, but they also got some bad news the night before that tanked their spirits and their stock price. A deal that was 7 months in the making and was reportedly worth upwards of $2 billion had fallen through. Lars said that the deal would have, quote, set a new benchmark for the gaming industry, end quote. Suits and CEOs always say things like this, but Lars probably really meant that statement considering the amount of money that slipped through his fingers. Nobody knows who it was that pulled out of the deal, but some are speculating that it might have been a Game Pass deal with Xbox. That news might not seem like it has any kind of effect on the KOTOR project, especially after they pulled out, but Embracer does own Aspyr and Saber Interactive. A financial hit like that could have any number of ramifications, and it's really too soon to tell what the fallout of that event will be. Aspyr has had another blow dealt to their reputation with the announcement that they won't be moving forward with the restored content DLC they initially promised for the KOTOR 2 port for Nintendo Switch. They didn't provide a reason for this course of action either, so it's anybody's guess why it turned out this way, and probably is pretty bad that they don't want to say it. Or NDA. But, the only glimmer of hope we have for the Knights of the Old Republic remake we've all been waiting for actually comes from the May 24th Embracer presentation. When asked about the current status of the KOTOR remake, Lars had this to say. Favorite question? I have no further comments. Okay, so maybe that was a little bit non-committal, sure. But the financial report that followed the presentation did include the KOTOR remake in the list of titles currently in development. So we know some kind of work is being done on it. All we do now is trust in the Force and wait patiently for more news of the game's eventual, hopeful release. Keep your chin up. A new hope is on the horizon. The game came out more than 20 years ago, so what's a few more years for the remake?